Good afternoon. I'm back on Dartmoor. I'm going to do a little bit about the van today. I'm going to just run through how well the solar panel works. I've had quite a few questions on the channel from the video where I put the solar panel on the roof and quite a few other videos just about how well it works. So this video is going to kind of be about what you can expect from the panel we've got, how well it works, and some of the kind of what you can kind of have in the van when you're weighing how much battery power capacity you kind of need, what I have, and kind of how well I find it works for me really. So it's just a way of trying to assess how much power you need or your power demands kind of before you go away. The sun today is quite low at the moment just because it's quite late. It's kind of quite low this time of year anyway. So I checked earlier, only about half an hour ago, and the panel was only putting about half an amp into the battery, so not very good today. There is quite a lot of shading on the panel at the moment. The sun's very low and it's catching the roof bars on the van, so it's not going to be amazing to look at today, or the rest of the day anyway. And I suspect even midday it probably would have only been doing something about an amp, something like that, into the battery, just because it's still winter and the sun is quite far away from Earth, obviously. The best we did see though, kind of when we were abroad in Italy in the summer, was about 3.2 amps. And the best we kind of seen over here on a really good day was about 2.5 amps. So kind of anywhere from 2 to 2.5 amps I think is kind of acceptable on a nice sunny day, which isn't too bad. The panels are rated about 4 amps, so to get around about that, it's not working too badly at all. Yeah, the sun's quite low today, so like I say, it's not going to be amazing. I'll just show you where I'm parked up on Dartmoor. Just found this lay-by here to quickly go through it. And you can see the sun's, which you probably can't see because it's overcast. You should just be able to see there, the sun is just above my head at the moment, so it's not amazing. But yeah, I'll just run through some of the things you can kind of expect from the panel really. Well, I'm back in the van out the noise now, out the wind. Yeah, so basically we charge our ledger battery two ways. We have a solar panel on the roof, which I was just saying works to varying degrees, and we have a split charge relay which takes the charge off the alternator, which charges the main battery. That generally works okay. There's no way at all I could rely on the solar panel to charge our ledger battery when I go away. The reason is just because the amount of stuff I charge. So when I go away, I charge batteries for this camera, which is a 7D. I also charge them for my other main camera, which is a 6D. I have 3 or 4 batteries. I only have 2 with me today for this camera, or for these cameras, and these batteries are, I'll just tell you, these are about 1.8 amps. It's slightly different because it's obviously 12 volts, or well, not 12 volts, these are probably about 4 volts or 3.7, and the main battery is 12 volts. But you can kind of get a rough idea of how much power you're going to need by looking at what you're going to charge and what you're going to use in the van. So these batteries are about 1.8 amps. I have 4 of them, so that's roughly about 7 or whatever it is, 9 kind of amps. And those batteries, if I charge 4, I have things for my time lapse, which is probably a few amps in that battery that you charge. Then you have things like the drone. These normally on a day I might only go through 2 of these if I'm doing a lot of time lapse stuff. On a kind of day that's cold though, in the winter, sometimes you can go for 3 of them. They don't last very long at all. Drone batteries, these only last 20 minutes. These are 4.4 amps, so these are big batteries. I have 2 of these. Sometimes if you're going away, you can go through 4 of these if I'm on a road trip or something. Sometimes 5 a day or 6 a day. That's a lot of power you're taking off your main leisure battery. Also, the charger that charges these is quite a fast charger. It's about an hour charge. And I think it's really inefficient. In other words, it uses more energy to charge them than is actually in the battery, like most things. But I think these ones are particularly bad because this has a habit of really flattening my leisure battery. You also have other stuff like the controller. Granted, you're not charging this every day. This will go for weeks at a time. If you do need to charge this is an 8 amp battery in this, so that's going to take a lot of power. Then you have things like the gimbal, which the phone's on now, which is probably a few amps in that. Again, that will go for weeks before it needs a charge, so it's pretty good, to be honest. But then things like the laptop, if you've done a lot of editing, you go over this. This again is a few more amps. If you add that to your lights, anything else you're going to charge, your phone for instance, which I'm using here, but I've got a Galaxy S7, I think that's got around about 4 amp battery in it as well. Most people know these days you have to charge your phone every night, so that's going on every night as well. And you soon get to a point where you use a lot of power. I've got 110 amp AGM leisure battery. Now people think when they buy a battery, they think, oh, I've got all that capacity. You don't. You only have, depending on the battery, generally speaking, half the capacity. If you want your battery to last a few years, that is. If you can take your battery down to empty regularly if you want, but your battery will probably fail after a year or so. The general rule, if you can keep it above 50% for an AGM battery, or 70% for a dry cell or a wet cell sealed battery, your battery's going to last a lot longer. So my 110 amp battery is an AGM battery. That means we can take it down to 50% of its charge. So I get 55 amps out of that battery. And as you can see, if I'm charging all this stuff all the time, and I'm relying on a solar panel that is going to put in probably say 2 amps per hour over an average 10-hour day, that's 20 amps. You put the maths together, the solar panel is not going to be able to keep this charged. If I then use the cool box, which is a 4 amp cool box, that is going to do 40 amps in 10 hours and it's just going to wipe the battery out. So you can't rely on a solar panel. If you're a photographer and you've got loads of stuff to charge, you just can't. Even if I had 2-3 panels on the roof, it probably just wouldn't give me the power I need. The split charge will put 20 to 30, 40 amps into the battery. So always recommend, if you're doing anything with a leisure battery in the van, the first thing you should be doing is putting in a split charge relay. The worst case scenario, a split charge relay, in the middle of the night, if you've got no power and your lights go out or your stuff's not charging, you just start the engine up in your van and it will charge it for you and you'll get everything back. That's the number one thing to do. They're not expensive, they're pretty easy to fit. Split charge relay is what you want to be doing first. The solar panel, the main reason I put the solar panel on the van was, one, to help with the cool box. So if we're in a really hot country and we got the cool box running all day, that solar panel will supplement the power for the cool box, so it won't flatten the battery. But the other main reason is because I have an AGM battery. AGM batteries like to be trickle charged as well. So rather than just getting all the power from the alternator when you're driving, the last 20-30% of AGM battery, it likes to have like a low current, not the kind of massive power surge or current you get off the alternator. So by putting a solar panel on the roof, it means that the alternator is going to do most of the charge, and that last 20-30% is going to be trickling from the solar panel, in theory. So it's going to mean that the AGM leisure battery lasts a lot longer. Like I was saying, it swings and roundabouts. If you have a normal battery or an AGM battery, normal batteries you can only take down 30%, but they don't need that trickle charge. You can just literally ram in power from an alternator and they'll charge up and be fine. But you get only 30% of the capacity of the battery you can use, whereas an AGM you can get 50%. So it's totally up to you what you want to use. So to answer the question that a few people said about the solar panel, yes, it does help. It will give you some days 3 amps, and the cool box is 4 amps, and that means I can leave that cool box on during the day without flattening the battery. It also means that if I'm not using the van for a while, I don't have to worry about charging the battery as long as it's outdoors and keeping it topped up. I know that every day it's going to get a few amps in from the sun, and it's going to keep it kind of healthy. And it's just going to really help keep the battery maintained and keep it working at its optimal efficiency. So recommend the solar panel, but I'd see it as an additional add-on, and it does help. We have a 120 watt, I think it is, I'll correct it if it's wrong, Moohoo solar panel it's made by Solar Cell. I can't remember the name of the company that make the solar cells, but it's a 22% efficiency one. Good panel, but they are limited. You can't go away and plug everything in and expect to get away with it. They do have a limited power they can put out. Ours is meant to do about 5 amps if you work it out, something like that. But then you've got to think about the efficiencies as it goes through the charge controller. And you've got to think about the ideal conditions, or the kind of condition you're actually going to get when you're using it. So we use ours for an MPPT solar controller. It's a bit overkill for a 120 watt panel. The other ones to use are, which I can't remember now, are what is it called? Pulse width modulation. Pulse width modulation is like a switch. It simply switches the voltage down, because the panels will be getting about 18-19 volts in. It's like a switch. It cuts on and off really quickly to bring the voltage down. The only problem is, though, that extra voltage that you're cutting off to get down to 12 volts for the battery is lost. You don't get any benefits from it. On an MPPT, that extra voltage to go from 18-19 to 12 is converted into current to help charge the battery. So you get more charge off an MPP controller than you do a PWM controller. The problem, though, is an MPPT uses about half an amp power when it's charging. So unless you start getting over half an amp of power from the sun, you won't get any charge, whereas a PWM you will. So swings and roundabouts. Generally speaking, a system that's 150 watt or below, most people say go with a PWM. Anything over that, you want to be looking at an MPPT. I went for an MPPT just because on a good day I could get more sun out of it, and we were going to be using the van in Europe, like Italy, hotter places than kind of the UK really, where you are guaranteed to have more sun. So it was kind of where I went kind of for that one. Hopefully you kind of get what I mean from this, get a few questions answered. Like I say, the range with ours is probably maximum of 3 amps on a good day we get from the panel. Average, say, on an average day in England, 1 amp, and kind of a good hot summer's day anywhere 2.5, something like that. So that's kind of the range you're looking at. And then obviously times that by the amount of daylight you've got, and that should be able to roughly work out how much power you're going to get put into your battery each day. Hope you found it useful. It's not that informative, this one. It's just a quick talk of our setup, how we get on with it, and just kind of say, you know, you do need a kind of split charge really. I would definitely recommend it. In fact, that's the thing I'd say put in first. Try and get the biggest capacity battery you can afford, and that'll fit. And make sure you keep it charged. Don't go letting it go below 50% too much. Look into an AGM battery because you'll get more capacity out of them. The other thing is make sure whatever battery you get, make sure it's sealed, because when batteries charge, they give off hydrogen dioxide or peroxide or whatever, some hydrogen acid fumes or something. I'll write it down. Which is extremely explosive. So if you're cooking in the van as well and stuff like that, and you have a non-sealed battery, there's a low risk, but there is a risk there that you could have an explosion. So make sure it's a sealed battery or a maintenance-free battery to get rid of that danger. Hope you found it useful. I hope you found it interesting. If you have any questions, please comment. If you enjoyed it, please like and subscribe. just before the sun goes down now, I'm going to get up to Bolerman's Nose, do a bit of landscape photography. The clouds aren't really that great today, there's not really enough of them, so I don't think it's going to pick up too much red colour in the sky. But we never know. If you're interested, I'll put that blog up at some point that I'm about to do now, and yeah, please give that a thumbs up. Alright, I'll see you next time.